Today is May 31st, 2007. I'm in the Oklahoma County Courthouse in Oklahoma City. And my name is Tanya Finchum, and this is the project for the Oklahoma State University Library called Women of the Oklahoma Legislature. And I'm with Honorable Twyla Mason Gray, who was in the House of Representatives 1980 to 84.
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
Got that right. Well, welcome, and I'm so glad you were able to let us talk with you today.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, the first question, just tell us a little bit about your childhood, where you were born, and a little bit about your youth.
I was born in Tulsa. My parents were both born and raised in southwestern Oklahoma. And my dad went to OSU. He was the first member of his family to go to college. And after he graduated, he went to work for the IRS in Tulsa. I was the middle child of three, and Tulsa was a great place to grow up. I have lots of happy childhood memories, and I think like a lot of people my age, we were able to go out in the morning and pretty much play hard all day, and our moms were home when we got home, and I went to public schools, and I will say that I had a physical disability. I had a deformity in both of my knees. It really impacted my life because there were a lot of physical things that I could not do. And I also had surgery a number of times as a child. And so I began to read. And I spent a lot of my summers, the week after school would be out, I'd have surgery again. And I'd be laying around for a great deal of the summer. And I would read a pile of books. And I lived through those books. I traveled and had experiences. And I think it had a huge impact on my life. My father was very involved in politics in Tulsa and across the state, and so I grew up tagging along to political events and new candidates and new people who were in elected office, and worked in a whole lot of campaigns. In 1976, I worked in a particular campaign when James R. Jones was running for re-election in Congress, to Congress. And I had worked in his earlier campaigns, but after the 76 election, I went to work for him in his office in Tulsa. And I really did that for about a year and a half. And then I decided to run in 1980, and in part I ran because I knew a lot of people in the legislature. I had been over at the legislature. I had seen what they had done. I realized that there were many people there that didn't work as hard as I did. Where I had sort of held them in very high esteem, I saw that as a group, the House, there were people that were smart and people who were not so smart. People who worked hard and people who didn't. People who were talented, people who weren't. And I thought, you know what, I can do this. And so in 1980 I ran. I was 25 years old when I filed for office. I turned 26 the week before the election. And the day after I was sworn into office, which would have been in November of 1980, I had surgery on both my knees again. So it's sort of a lifelong deal. It impacted my election because I couldn't walk the district.
Shake hands, knock on doors.
Yeah, I had to campaign in a different way. So,
well, can you explain a little bit about how you did campaign then?
I ran for a House district. I was a registered Democrat at the time. And I ran for a House district that was very large. 1980 was the year that we were going to do redistricting. The census was done in 80, and in 81 we would do redistricting. So I ran for a Senate seat in population and size, and then I got the House seat. So it required me to do a lot of mail. I think probably at that time we may have done 9 or 10 different direct mail pieces, which was a ton back in 1980. And it was expensive. So it cost a lot of money to run a campaign. And some districts and some communities are very historically campaigned by knocking doors. And you just can't win in those districts unless you knock those doors. The area that I was running in, which was East Tulsa County, did not have that kind of a history. And which, was one of the things that I looked at and evaluated when I decided to run. I thought it was an area that could be campaigned by direct mail. I also had a series of coffees where we would go in and we would mail a precinct, and then we would have a coffee and people could come by and meet you and visit with you. And then I would send them thank you notes. And so we did that in the precincts in my district. I don't remember now how many precincts there were. I will tell you that Sue Tibbs, who's currently a member of the House from my old House district, was a childhood friend, and she had one of the coffees for me.
Good.
Yeah.
So were you the first woman from your district
Oh, yeah.
to win?
In fact, I was the first Democrat.
Oh, okay. And what was that like?
Well, it was okay. At that time, the House of Representatives did have a majority of Democrats. And I think that there was some appreciation for the fact that I had taken a seat that was Republican. But Tulsa was not held in high esteem in the Oklahoma legislature. And the year that I was elected in 1980, I think there were 5 women from Tulsa that year. Penny Williams and myself and Helen Arnold and Arlene Baker. Oh, and Joan Hastings. There were 5 of us. And so I was not only very young, I was from Tulsa County. And neither one of those things was particularly helpful in the House.
Well, did anyone take you under their wing and kind of shepherd you along?
Not at first. There were people that I knew and trusted, and that the majority leader was a guy named Vernon Dunn, and he was from Loco, Oklahoma. And Vernon was a really tough guy. He'd had a farming accident. His leg had been caught, I think, in a combine, and to save his life, he cut off his own leg and crawled to the farmhouse. So, I mean, he was really a tough guy. And at the time that I was elected, Cleta Deathridge was the chairman of appropriations, and she and Vernon did not get along. And Vernon really had it in his mind that all young women were going to be like Cleta. And so one of the things that I did was work hard to persuade him that that was not the case, because I really, when you go into a group like that, you have to find a way to get along with people that you have nothing in common with. It's easy to look at people like Robert Henry, who was very well educated and very articulate, and we had a lot of things in common, and we had a lot of positions in common, and get along with him. But if you hang out with the people that you get along with, you don't learn anything. And so I needed an understanding of people that I had nothing in common with. So when I first started trying to see Vernon and go by his office, he wouldn't see me. So what I finally did one day was I noticed his wife in there, and I sat down and visited with her for a little bit. And his wife stitched, and she had stitched a pillow or a little wall hanging or something that was in his office. And I love to sew. It's one of the things that I developed when after I'd had surgery. I knit and I stitch, and I still do those things. And so what I began to do was to take my needlepoint and sit in his office. And after I had done that a couple of days, and he was too busy to see me, he walked through and he said, "My daughter does that, and my wife does that." And I said, "Yeah, and I do too. And it's a great thing to do while you're waiting around." And it gave us a beginning of a conversation. And we became friends, and there were a lot of things that Vernon taught me, and ultimately I began to date a member of the leadership whose name was Twyla Gray, who was a member from Oklahoma County. And Charlie taught me a great deal, and of course we married in November of
81.
Yeah, 1981, so it was a long time ago. I like him more today than I did then, so I'm really blessed. But Charlie taught me a great deal.
Well, I had read in the paper where you had to go through some legal, I don't know if legal is the right word, but issues to determine.
Well, the law in Oklahoma at the time had to do with what they called the head of household law. And residency and domicile are two different issues in the law. But there was some confusion over whether or not, when I married, I would lose my residency in my district. And some of the Republicans kind of told me that if I married him, they would sue me on the basis that I had vacated my house seat. And so we had to get an attorney general's opinion that by marrying I was not giving up my domicile, that I could choose that. So.
Well, and when you ran for re-election, was it an issue again, or did you run in a different?
What they did was they claimed that I didn't live in the district, that my husband had an apartment here, and that I lived here all the time. And I not only was reelected, but it wasn't true. And Charlie and I didn't really live together full time until we'd been married about 3.5 years. And then we lived in Tulsa full time.
Well, that was a historical moment too, from what I gather from the papers, because it said it was the first time two incumbent House members had married.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was an interesting time, I would think.
It was very interesting. We had a great time courting, as my husband would say. He was from southwestern Oklahoma. And in fact, we dated for a couple of months before another member, a guy named Tommy Maynor, who was from Apache, told us that our parents all knew one another. And went home and found out that indeed our parents did all know one another, which just was really peculiar. It's such a small world.
It was destiny, huh?
I guess.
Well, what was your first day in office like? The very first day. Can you remember that part? Anything in particular? How about when you were sworn in?
I remember the swearing in as being just a day of great joy. There are a few days in your life where you have such a surge of happiness. And that was one of them. I remember the first time that I made a speech on the House floor.
That was my next question.
And, you push these little buttons for recognition. And I remember I'm holding the microphone, and I look down and my hand is shaking. And so I think, oh no, so I clamp my arm down by my side, and I'm not going to shake. And then my voice begins to shake. I was so nervous. But I was really young to have those experiences. And they were great experiences to have. At that age, I think I learned valuable lessons that have been applied in all areas of my life, because on any given day, you had to get along with 51 members of the House, you had to get along with 25 members of the Senate, and you had to get along with the governor. And in politics, friends come and go and enemies just accumulate. So you would have an issue and you'd be working side by side with somebody that you just really didn't like. And you had to develop respect for them in some way in order to be able to work together. So somebody that you really didn't think was very smart or very talented, and I think particularly when you're young, you're very impatient with people. And you would see them with their children and you'd think they're a great parent, and that's something you could kind of hang on to. Or there would be somebody who worked really hard and you'd think, wow, they're very dedicated to this. I think most people, when we were setting up, people are not one-dimensional. And so there are people that you come across in life that you just detest. But you discover that in another realm, they really do wonderful things. And as a judge now, I often tell people, I do this professionally, I had to give up my amateur status as a judge. I'm so glad that there's an omnipotent God that knows our hearts and our minds and our intentions, because our view is so narrow. And I think that that's one of the big lessons that I learned in the legislature.
What did you, a big challenge, was anything that was the most challenging? Did you present any bills that they worked really hard to get passed and then they didn't?
Oh, sure. And one of I don't even remember what the content of the bill was, but there was an old gnarly guy named Bill Bradley who was the head of banks and banking, and Bill's son Hank is now a banker here in Oklahoma City. And Bill was about 157 at that time. And he introduced me and he said, there's this little woman from Tulsa County and we're going to let her talk about her bill before we kill it. Yeah. And of course they did. So, there were those kinds of experiences. One of the lessons that I learned from my husband was that I was not so much interested in whether my name was on the bill, but on what happened. And so there were a lot of pieces of legislation that I handled on the floor or I did the roll calls on because I cared about the topic. And I worked on the bill that allowed for prosecution of spousal rape. The people do things to each other that, frankly, I had never heard of or thought about before I went to the legislature. And I worked on a bill that was a rape by instrumentation. There were lots of bills that I worked on. One of the things that was the most important to those of us from Tulsa County was the University Center of Tulsa. And, sometimes everybody plays a small role, but every role is important. And that's kind of what happened in that bill. Jim Williamson, who was a House member then from Tulsa, my husband taught us both how to roll call a bill. And I did the Democrats and Jim did the Republicans. And what happened on the bill was that with Cleta Deathridge representing OU and the Speaker of the House, Dan Draper, representing OSU, we couldn't get the bills out of committee. And they made a mistake in the appropriation process, and they did not move the higher education appropriation bill out of the appropriations committee by deadline. And the next day, I was reading the journal and saw that it had not come out. And Bob Hopkins, I think, then was probably the elder statesman of the Tulsa delegation. And I went running to Bob on the floor and said, this bill is in the committee. Well, I had called a check to see, the bill wasn't out of committee. I had called the chief clerk's house to see if it was a mistake. And of course, they went to the chief clerk, who was Richard Huddleston, and said, mistake was made. He told Draper, and Deathridge got up to ask for unanimous consent that the bill be moved, and Bob Hopkins objected. and then the fight was on, because we had taken this roll call to keep the bill into committee until we got the University Center in Tulsa. And we were able to keep that bill from coming out for 4 days, which is a big deal for the Speaker of the House and the Appropriations Chair. But they can make a lot of promises, and people began to fall off. But eventually, we got it. And it was hand-to-hand combat every day. In fact, one of the things that happened, because it was close to the end of session, was in the leadership meeting, there was a big battle because my husband, who was on the leadership, had helped us roll call the bills and had taught us what to do and had coached us about how to talk to different people. And there were folks who were really mad at him, and they got into a big fight, and the leadership didn't meet the rest of the year. Their weekly luncheons were canceled. And so it was an exciting time.
Gosh, and how early in the morning did you have to get up to prepare for this type of day?
Early.
Early.
Yeah. I mean, I was there early and I was there late. I was not one of the people who breezed in at 9 o'clock and left at 4. And in those days, we didn't have the kind of deadlines they do now, which gave us the ability to throw a potluck dinner and to talk about ideas and to brainstorm and to share stuff. And so I did some of that, and I also, I went to events and I spent time with people as a way to get to know them. Again, because you have to get to know people to get beyond that picture in a legislative guy.
Well, you said you came in with 5 other women from Tulsa. Did you kind of form a support group?
Well, Joan Hastings and Helen Arnold had been there for a while, but Arlene and Penny and I, we all knew each other really well, and I don't know that we were, in any kind of formal sense, but Penny Williams and I were very close friends, and she was there for me a number of times. I had known Joan for a long time, but we weren't as personal friends, and Helen Arnold was absolutely wonderful and gracious to all of us. I think at that time, I won't remember everybody. Freddie Williams was there, and Freddie was just as sweet as she could be, and Dorothy Connigan.
Well, did you rent an apartment and live here, or did you commute back and forth from Tulsa?
I rented an apartment to stay here Monday through Thursday, but then I was back in Tulsa.
Or did you share it with any event?
No. I had a little efficiency and lived by myself. But actually, Penny and I lived in the same complex, and we weren't in one another's apartments often, but I think there was a little sense of security in knowing that we were there. But we all talked to each other a lot, and had mutual interest of education and the University Center, and so it was a nice, very nice group of people that were as supportive as they knew how to be. Were notoriously independent and notoriously controlling, thinking that if you're not out there working, the sun just may not shine today. So in some ways, it's kind of an odd group, but at the same time, people really did try. And my sister was very ill by the second year of my term. My sister got ill, and Charlie and I had to postpone our wedding, and then she ended up, she died in January right after sessions started. And I remember a number of women who were quite a bit older than I was and who really reached out to me. It was my first experience with someone close to me dying. And you know, as you get older, you have more of those experiences. And I think that they had a very good understanding of what that was going to be like. And we're just very generous.
In the right place at the right time, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, did you notice any difference in the culture between the men and the women on the floor and outside of the
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, it's a huge difference. You know, for a lot of those guys, they had never worked with women before. You know, if they'd been ranchers or they'd been farming, they really hadn't had a lot of contact with women. And I think that, especially by now, we know that people tend to stay with things that they're familiar and comfortable with. And so there were men there who thumped the Bible and who said that they had a biblical entitlement. I mean, I will never forget a senator on the spousal rape bill saying that if he didn't rape his wife, he'd probably never have sex. I will never forget we were doing a child support bill, and a guy in the Senate was saying, does this mean that, you know, if you have a one-night stand, you're responsible for the child? I just can't imagine that. And I think you can't be that ignorant. But a lot of it was based on what I clearly believe is misinterpretation of the Bible and ignorance. So when people tend to hang out with folks that are just like them, they're going to hang out with other guys. And to throw a woman into that mix, they're really uncomfortable with. In fact, I tell people that first I was a member. So I got to go the places that members went. Then I was a girlfriend of Charlie Gray. So I got to go to the girlfriend places. Then I was a wife. And I got to go to the wife places. And that made some of them very uncomfortable. You know, men say and do things with one another that they're not always comfortable doing in front of women. And quite frankly, a lot of them were uncomfortable that I would say things to their wives about what I had seen them doing. And I think it's interesting, and perhaps we're not so tolerant of this now. But there was a lot of do as I say, not as I do. And a lot of the guys who were the biggest religious thumpers on the floor of the house were also the ones who were the most unfaithful to their families. And I didn't have a lot of respect for that then, and I have even less tolerance of it now.
What did they could you tell if they treated you any different when you were the one presenting the bill on the floor? Asked tougher questions or?
No, because once Charlie Gray taught me about roll call on a bill, I never went to the floor unprepared. I knew where my votes were before I got up. And one of my best friends in the house was a guy named Jim Glover, who was from Elgin, Oklahoma, and Jim was about 6'4" and weighed about 240. And we became great friends. And I always enlisted his help. There were times when we couldn't agree on positions, but if Glover and some of those guys could help me on bills, if somebody started to harass me on the floor, they'd just stand up and move to advance the bill, or to cut off debate. And that just comes from those personal relationships. In fact, when I retired, they gave me a little award that said that I was the only member of the House that Jim Glover was afraid of. I don't think that was true, but we were good friends. Good friends.
That's good too. Well, where was your office?
Well, originally my office was on the 4th floor, in part because of my lousy knees, and it was very close to the chamber, so I didn't have to walk very far. Those marble floors really wreaked havoc with me, and I spent lots of days with ice bags and stuff, Ziploc bags. And then, let's see, I officed on 5 for a while, and then I officed on 3, so I was kind of up and around and everywhere. In 1982, when I was reelected, my husband retired, and Dan Draper was still Speaker of the House. And I got punished for the University Center at Tulsa, and so Dan took my office, and there was a variety of things that went on. All my bills got triple assigned. Well, I had been able to accomplish the split in the leadership. I had Vernon Dunn and Charlie Gray helping me against the Speaker, and it was a big deal. And so there was a change in the Speaker of the House. Jim Barker was elected, and then everything changed and kind of went back to normal. But probably that first session, I had very little to do because I couldn't get anything done. And so I sort of did what I call guerrilla warfare. I didn't have anything to do other than to read their bills and to ask irritating questions. And so that's pretty much what I did. And then when Jim Barker was elected Speaker, things leveled out, and I worked on legislation and could get my bills out of committee. And so.
He was ousted later, though, wasn't he?
Yeah, a couple of terms later. Yeah. But I was gone by then. I'm sorry?
I'm beginning to learn these names.
I bet.
Various names coming up.
I bet.
And you chose not to run for re-election the third time, correct?
Correct.
Any particular reasons for it?
Well, yeah, I wanted to start a family, and I couldn't do that from Tulsa. I couldn't commute. So it was a pretty easy choice for me.
So you had other career goals in mind too, when you decided not to run again.
You know, I had always wanted to go to law school, and so I did. And I don't know that I had any specific goals in mind, other than I really was passionate about going to law school, and my husband was very supportive of that. And so
Here you are.
here I am.
Well, what if do you have a particular political philosophy, or a philosophy of life? If not political, then a life philosophy.
You know, a friend of mine suggested recently that it's a useful exercise to write your philosophy of life. And I've thought about it a little bit and have not done it. I think by nature, I'm a very black and white person. It is very easy for me to draw bright lines. And I think more of my life these days includes having compassion for yourself as well as for others. I think that I've been very demanding of myself through the years. And I'm surprised at the, I always want to be able to say, yes, I ate all the fiber, I eat 5 vegetables a day, and I don't feel any better. So then you don't have to do it anymore, but you do feel better. And so you have to say, darn, now I've got to really do this. I think that discipline plays a huge role in life. And there's a beginning sentence in a book that I just love, and it says, life's difficult. And it is. And once you kind of accept that and get quit trying to fight that, then it gets easier.
Well, would you encourage young women to go into politics? And if so, what kind of advice would you give them?
I would encourage young women to do whatever they find rewarding and valuable. For me, that included politics. It is a life-changing experience. It is not easily translated into private business. The skills that you learn, some are, but some aren't. I mean, in many situations, the kind of personal power that you use in the legislature is inappropriate and overpowering to people. And so, if you win, it's a life-changing experience, but it's also life-changing if you lose. And I've seen a number of people's lives really changed by that. I found it to be a very rewarding and very valuable experience. So I would certainly encourage women to look at it. And I think that the public has high expectations for women. I think they expect us to be more ethical and to be more responsible and to be less influenced by money and by traditional systems of power or the good old boy system. And I think I think we have to be careful with the trust that's been placed in us.
Did you have any role models? Female role models? Barbara Jordan?
Barbara Jordan was somebody that I had great admiration for. I was in high school when the Watergate hearings were going on. And I can remember going home and turning on the television and watching the hearings. And she was beautiful. And she had this wonderful voice. And as I was able to read about her life, I just thought, wow, this is somebody that I can really admire. And I had read a lot of, Eleanor Roosevelt and other really powerful women in history. But Barbara Jordan was somebody that was more tangible to me. I can't say that there were any particular women that I knew that were particular role models. There were pieces that I learned from Penny Williams. There were other things that I learned from Helen Arnold. There were lots of things that I learned from men as well. And I really did have some great male mentors through the years. In Tulsa County, there was a guy who was a contemporary of my father's named Tommy Frazier. And Tommy had taken me under his wing and was very gracious to me through the years. There was also another guy who was a contemporary of my dad's, a friend of my dad's. His name is Darvin Brown. And all of those guys were really good to me. I think it's particularly important, if you can, to mentor other women. And I try to make myself available to do that. I just didn't have as much access to women back then.
You said you had a sister. Is it just the two of you?
No, I had a younger brother too. My sister passed away, and my younger brother is a very successful businessman in Dallas. And I laugh that he's been so successful, people are waiting for me to do well. We're very close. He's a great guy. He has 2 daughters.
And were you the only one went into politics then?
Yes. My brother actively supports candidates and does fundraising and is interested in politics, but did not choose to run for office.
He may yet, huh?
Good, I guess.
Let's see, what else haven't we covered? Well, we could go into what you've been doing since you left office.
Well, I did go to law school, and after that, I took over the financial management. I took over the financial management of some companies and did that for a couple of years. And then I had cancer in 1990. It took me about a year to go through all of the treatment. And my husband and I decided to move back to Oklahoma City. So we did that. And I did some volunteer work for legal aid here. And then in 94, I was appointed as a judge for the city of Oklahoma City. And in 1998, I decided to run for office again. And I was elected as a district judge here in Oklahoma County. And I've been reelected twice since then.
So your days from the legislature helped
Sure.
this time around with the
election?
Sure. Different type of campaigning now, I would.
Oh, very different, because it's a nonpartisan race, and in fact, you're prohibited from disclosing your party affiliation, which I think is right. And in a judicial race, I really do think we want to elect people based on their qualifications, not on their party. But it certainly helped that I knew a lot of people, and it helped that my husband had been an elected official in Oklahoma County. After we moved back here in 92, he was reelected to the legislature and served 10 years and left in 2002. And we have one child, and she's now a senior in college. So we've been busy with her through the years.
Great. Well, my last question then is, unless you have something else you want to say, is when history is written about you, what would you like for it to say?
That I did some good for somebody.
From what I've read, you did and have and will continue to.
Well, thank you.
Is there anything I haven't covered that we need to make sure we get on tape? Anything else you want to say about being gender differences and the...
You know, the only other thing that I would say is that I think that a lot of times men presume that women will be easier to overpower. Bully is not quite the right term, but when you are a member of a group and there's a big divide, maybe a tax increase, and there are people who are pushing hard on both sides, it is difficult not to succumb to the pressures. I do remember, I think it was a gasoline tax increase for roads, but it was a big deal. And they called my father to see if he would talk to me about changing my vote, which really made me mad. And the governor called me down to his office to explain to me what was going to happen. And I remember really feeling pressured about it. And I can remember getting up in the morning and kind of getting ready for the office and thinking, if I give in on this, I will never forgive myself. And I'm not going to do that. And it was very hard to do. In fact, as I recall, my husband voted for the bill and I voted against it. And And he didn't say a word to me about it. But knowing whether you have the ability to withstand pressure is a very valuable tool. I remember somebody saying to me one time, you know, everybody has a price. I just don't know what mine is yet. It's not about money. But we all have things that we care about so much that we would be pressured about that. I watched a lot of men that I thought had a lot of backbone and discovered that I had more backbone than most of them. That's disarming to a lot of men. It's also threatening to a lot of men. I don't think it's quite as socially acceptable to say those things now as it was 25 years ago, but I think it's still a reality.
Lessons learned.
Yeah.
Well, that's all I have. Those are very good answers. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak with you today.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.